Hello everyone, and welcome to a video that I think is important for me to make so that you guys kind of understand what each class kind of does in general, without me having to go into super detail. The system I'm going to be using continuing on to figure out which class I do next is kind of a voting-based system where I have 3 classes up for vote, and you guys vote on the one you want to see next. And it might be a little difficult to vote on what you want to see next if you don't know what any of the classes do. I mean, I can tell you that the class votes that you can make are for Oracle, Mystic, and Witch, and you'd be like, okay, I guess I just picked the one that sounds the coolest. But if I tell you what each one of those classes do, it might be a little easier to vote, because then you can vote on the one you think sounds the coolest, or maybe you want to save the cooler one for later. I've split these classes into 3, technically 4 different classes. We've got the martial classes. These are all the classes that are going to be focused on combat using weapons most of the time. They might have a bit of spellcasting potential, but the main premise of a martial class is going to be combat related in the majority of the features that they gain. The second category, I've got casters. These are classes that the main point of the class is going to be their spell list and what they can use their spell slots for. Perhaps they'll have extra ways of casting spells, perhaps they'll get special types of spell slots, but the overarching reason to play this class is to use spells. The third category you have is utility classes. This is a bit of a hard one to explain, but the basic premise is that these characters are most effective when they are helping their team out. For example, the rogue has a lot of skill-based abilities, and so outside of combat, they're really good if they go in, sneak around, pick locks, and overall figure things out for their team. Well, the Artificer is really effective at buffing their team up by, enchanting magical items and giving their team overall boosts to their potential. There's a lot of other classes just like this that are really good when they're helping their team out, and that's the basic premise of a utility character. The final category is just the Polaritist. It's a category all of its own because it is so weird, but we'll get to it when we get to it. The other thing I want to bring up is that, just like I've said in the past, I am not done making this system yet. I made all these skill trees about a year ago, but I'm still working out the kinks between all of them and making sure that they all work properly. And so what you see on the screen today for a class that I have not yet discussed might look slightly different when I actually post it. As I've been going through these and posting the videos on the class themselves, I've been tweaking abilities, changing up the way things look. I might move things like extra attack a node further up the chain in case it was too early or too late, and changing up things, adding abilities, removing abilities that were too strong. There's going to be changes made to these, so don't expect the class tree to look exactly as it does right now when I post the video explaining all the abilities. But it will look probably very similar. That all being said, let's get into it now. Starting off with the martial classes, we've got the Barbarian. The Barbarian has one basic feature that really goes to show how powerful you can be if you're just the tank of the group. It's Rage. When you start up a Rage, you're going to be getting resistance to bludgeoning, slashing, and piercing attacks, and you'll also get extra damage based off of your rage counter. And these things go up as you level up. You'll be able to put more resistances in, you'll be able to put extra damage on your rage damage, and eventually you'll get to one of these abilities that gives you a special rage type. For example, the Berserker Rage gives you the ability to dump extra rage uses to deal extra damage, and the Magic Rage gives you the ability to cast spells while raging. Next up, we've got the Chieftain. The Chieftain's ability basically is that you can summon this mental creature called your Tulpa, which fights for you. You can give it special attacks, you can give it extra attack, or you can give yourself extra attack and fight alongside it. Next up, we've got an extremely large class. This rivals the Barbarian in size. It is the Dragoon. The Dragoon is basically the Battlemaster fighter. You get skills that you can attach to your attacks to do extra stuff, and you've got a limited resource of those things, but in general, Dragoon is pretty cool. Crusader. This is one half of the regular Paladin class, where basically the idea behind it is that you can create an aura about yourself that buffs your allies, while you get things like channel divinity and a lot of proficiencies when it comes to riding a mount and mounted combat overall. The fighter. This is your basic fighting type character. You have a lot of efficiency with weapons. You get extra ability with whatever weapon you want to use. You have the fastest access to extra attack and a pretty fast access to +1 attack as well. But the best part of fighter is things like second wind and action surge, which allow you to heal yourself or take extra actions on your turn. The Gladiator. The central feature that the Gladiator gets is Vigor. This ability allows you to basically reduce your initiative score mid-combat to get buffs like attacking again, moving further, or even healing in some cases. The Magus. This is a martial character that really puts some focus on their spellcasting, and it might actually be somewhat of a spellcaster in general, because if you take the left half of the Magus, all you really get is casting capabilities. But on the right side, its main feature is Spell Strike, the ability to basically use a Paladin Smite-like ability where as you attack, you cast the spell into the creature, and as long as you hit, the creature fails its save no matter what. The Monk. This is the class all about unarmed strikes. They get a main feature which is Ki, which they can spend on things like taking a bonus action to dash, disengage, or make another attack. They get special attacks that they can use their Ki to activate, like Snake Strike, Stunning Strike, or Rabbit Palm. Basically dumping special effects into their unarmed strikes or being able to attack a lot of times. In general, the Monk has some of the most attacks they can make on their turn with using things like Flurry of Blows, and they are really fast, getting a ton of move speed bonuses during all of this progression. The Paladin. This is another martial class that really makes use of spell slots in a great way. They refresh on a short rest also, and basically what you're going to do is dump specialized smites into your weapon as you hit to deal extra damage and sometimes extra effects. Alongside these smites, you get access to Lay on Hands, which is a great support ability, allowing you to heal your allies and even cure them of illnesses sometimes. The Ranger. Unlike the new Ranger, this one actually is good, giving you access to things like extra attack, +1 attack, and a ton of variability with ranged weapons, crossbows, bows, darts, blowguns, and you get plenty of multi-attack abilities, such as multi-attack defense, spread shot, or horde breaker. But of course, the best part about the Ranger is its ability to track down enemies, find paths, and its main feature, Mark Prey, which is what Hunter's Mark wants to be. A bonus action to cast and concentration-free extra damage on the target that you are targeting. As long as you gun down your marked prey, you can then move that mark to a different creature and continue the process all over again. The Samurai is very similar to the Fighter, but it is a bit more of a push-through type character. You get skills like Focus and Grazing Hits, which allow you to up your chances to hit and deal damage even on a miss. They've got a lot of quick interactions type abilities where they get to do extra things on their turn other than attack, and with their attack action, they can do up to 3 attacks with extra attack and +1 attack. The Shepherd is all about its stamina. They get to expend stamina points to boost their damage or take less damage from attacks. They get things like temporary hit point synergies, where they get to buff their own temporary hit points every turn, and break defenses, where they just remove all the temporary hit points of creatures they attack before dealing damage. They are super effective with stabs and slings, with buffs to both those weapons' viability in the game. In general, the Shepherd is really great at saying no to things and standing their ground. The Swashbuckler is the combat-based rogue, where skills aren't really that important to them, but what they really want to do is bother their enemies until they can finish them off. They get finisher dice and panache, where basically, as long as they can grant themselves panache by doing things like rolling around in front of their enemies, taunting them, dodging, or even just annoying their enemies can cause them to get these panache. And then when they have panache, they can spend it to do a finisher, which deals all their finisher dice into that creature and a little bit of bonuses depending on what finisher you use. The trainer is how you get a companion to come alongside it. You can play this as a summoner type build, or you can play it as a Beastmaster Ranger type deal, where basically you get to build up your beast companions' abilities as you level up. You can give them things like ability score improvements of their own, feats of their own, and even class levels of their own in a few cases. The final martial class is the Vanguard. This is a shield-based class where your protection is part of your attack, because you can attack with your shield. And you also get a ton of armor class upgrading features, protective features to protect your friends, and damaging abilities that allow you to use your shield as a great weapon. The Bard is all about their bardic inspiration and spellcasting in general. Like, many of the spellcasters will be faster to go through than the martials because the main fill of the class is going to be the spell list they have access to and what you pick those spells to be. So for the Bard, they get access to the Bard spell list, and they'll get their bardic inspiration, which they can use to give out to players nearby them, and those players can roll their bardic inspiration dice to boost their skill checks or attack rolls, sometimes even defense rolls and things like cutting words, which can allow you to reduce attack rolls of enemies. Next, we've got the Cleric, which gains access to the Cleric spell list for a lot of healing-based abilities. But on top of that, Clerics get extra spell slots, which they can spend on healing spells throughout the day. They'll get things like Channel Divinity, which can allow them to really focus in on certain things as long as they use it in the right time, like Path to the Grave, Restorative Gaze, or even Destroy Undead, which can wipe out swarms. Next, we've got the Druid, one of the fastest caster level classes. This gets to a really high caster level if you focus on it, but otherwise the features that druids can grant is Wild Shape, which allows you to transform into a creature. This creature might start off as a little bit of a small one, but as your CR gets higher and higher and your ability to transform becomes more varied, you can turn into things like oozes or even small dragons. The Gish. This skirts the edge of a martial class, but I would consider it more of a caster. The idea behind the Gish is to get in front of your backline characters and fight alongside your fighter and barbarian, weaving spells in and out of your attack rolls as you use things like Spell and Strike and Cantrip attack to cast spells and attack in the same turn. The Magician. This is all about reworking the way that roles can work at the table, using things like Staged, which allows you to basically roll ahead of time and decide when you want to use that roll for yourself or another creature. They get things like Mystical Magic Deck, which allows them to, when they roll or when another creature rolls, roll an extra dice and add effects to that roll. They get a ton of Charmed and performance-based abilities along with the Bard spell list. The Manipulator is all about controlling the battlefield using their Manipulate Matter ability. They get substance points, which they can spend to create effects like pillars of their matter that they control, covering themselves in this matter to protect themselves, riding it around for extra maneuverability, or else blocking off paths to control your enemies more effectively. And on top of that, the Sorcerer spell list is the one that they have access to. The Mystic is all about combining spells into each other and mixing them into fun combinations. They get Blend Spell and other things like Cascade, Grafting Spell, and Mixing Mana, which allow them to basically mix and match the way that spells work together. All this on top of a fun secondary ability, which is Mystic Missile, basically allowing them to cast Magic Missile as a cantrip on their turn. Oracle. This has got to be my favorite Pathfinder spellcasters. The Oracle is all about damaging yourself to cause your spells to be stronger. They get Cursed Spells, which is their main feature and allows them to upcast a spell to an enormous number. I mean, we're talking literally casting things like Fireball at 19th level for high-level Oracles. That being said, If you want to do this, you're going to be hurting yourself. You'll be gaining levels of cursed exhaustion when you cast cursed spells. And this is basically just exhaustion, but the Oracle can reduce that in special ways other than regular exhaustion. The Shaman is very druidic in nature. Instead of transforming into a beast, you get to watch and copy the abilities that you see your enemy creatures using against you, or even allies in some cases, and then turn those abilities into spells which you can cast. See, the Shaman doesn't actually gain access to a spell list. Instead, they get their blood book, and during any short rest, they can spend their own hit dice to basically create a spell that they can cast in that blood book that copies some ability that an enemy used. For example, a dragon breathes fire on you, write that down, and now it's one of your spells. The Sorcerer, a really fun caster that's all about adding and manipulating their spells in special ways using metamagic. This is a special ability that sorcerers gain access to where they get sorcery points, which they can spend to do things like empower their spells, cast them faster, heighten their casting level, or even cast them in a very subtle manner. They also get overflow, which allows them to boost their casting capabilities for a short while in order to get fights done faster. The Thaumaturge is all about using fear to your own advantage. When you have the fear condition, or when your enemy gets the fear condition, you can use your fearful spells to empower your spellcasting even higher, and being able to cast from a special list, the Thaumaturge spell list. The Warden. This is the caster that's all about counterspell. If you're fighting against a lot of casters, your Warden will be loving it. They also get things like legendary resistance denial. They also get a ton of arcane-based defensive capabilities, as long as shutting down their enemies from being able to do anything. The Warlock. The Warlock is a great toolbox of a class where basically whatever you want, you can pick up. As you go down its main overall tree branch, you can pick up these short jutting out nodes that pick up things like Misty Visions, Occult Eyes, or Mask of Many Faces, granting you these little boosts. Or you could take the right path and pick up a lot of martial capabilities, able to use your Charisma stat as your attack modifier for melee attacks. This all on top of having access to the Warlock spell list and short rest refreshing spell slots. The Witch. The other half of the Warlock in this situation. The Witch basically gets access to a familiar, which casts their spells for them. And alongside this, they'll get access to things like Hex, which allows them to put special curses on their enemies mid-combat to debuff them as they cast their spells from wherever their familiar happens to be standing. The Wizard. The Wizard gains access to the spellbook, one of the strongest ways to cast your spells. Not only you get huge access to all kinds of spells with the Wizard spell list, but you get to choose which ones you cast per day with the preparation that the Wizard gets access to from their spellbook. You get a ton of things like Arcane Recovery, allowing you to get extra spells per short rests, and things like Ritualist, allowing you to cast any ritual spell from your spellbook even if it's not prepared. Next up, we'll be looking at some utility characters, and these are going to be a little bit harder to follow because their abilities are often a bit niche and somewhat strange. But we'll hop right into it with the Alchemist. This is a very Artificer-esque character that basically brews potions. You get a certain amount of these vials that you can brew at the end of a long rest, giving you healing abilities for free, giving you the ability to boost the speed of your allies, or even just deal extra damage. Alongside damaging capabilities, you'll get Chemical Bombs, which is a mid-range ability allowing you to just throw chemicals at your enemies that explode, dealing damage all over the place. Picking up extra vials that they can prepare per long rest to buff their allies in many ways. It is one of the few classes that gains access to barriers for your team. Next up, we've got the Archivist. This is the class that basically says, do you want contingency to be your main class feature? Here you go. They get access to library spells, allowing them to have special spell slot progression, where basically they get one first level spell slot, one second level spell slot, all the way up to 9th level, way faster than any regular character could get there. But they can't actually cast any spells with these slots. Instead, they get Scroll Keeper and Talisman Keeper, allowing them to craft these talismans and scrolls and input spells into them. And then when the trigger happens for the talisman, the spell goes off. Or when one of your teammates or you uses their scroll to cast a spell, it'll go off, sometimes buffed in certain ways. Next, we've got the Artificer. The Artificer is great at buffing their allies' equipment up, or perhaps just boosting their own even better. They've got things like Mind Sharpener, allowing them to keep their concentration going even if they get hit for tons of damage. They get to replicate items that they've seen before, and all of this on top of having access to the Artificer spell list and the ability to infuse items that are magical. Next, we've got the Commander. This is a bit of a strange one in that it has plenty of martial capabilities, but it's going to be most effective if you're using your turn to command your allies into doing extra things, such as Strike Command, allowing one of your allies to make an extra attack during your turn. Swim and Climb commands, allowing you to give your team swimming speeds and climbing speeds throughout the day. Or even Charge Command, allowing your whole team to rush in ready to take on anything. The Investigator. This is quite a fun one. You get some martial combat prowess with the Investigator with Devise a Stratagem, allowing you to make an attack roll before your turn starts and use it if you would like, otherwise you could do something else. But the basic premise of the Investigator is to use your clues that you can pick up as you go, comparing them to each other to get hints from your DM as to what the next thing you might have to do is. You get a ton of extra capabilities for searching down rooms, finding the answer to puzzles, and just moving through with better skills than most other characters. Next, we've got the Rogue. Now, the Rogue is a bit of a strange one because it's very martial-based, but many of the skills have nothing to do with combat. Things like Reliable Talent and Intellectual User, allowing you to get better abilities off your skill checks. And Intellectual User just allows you to use any item, even if it's not made for rogues. You've got things like Copycat, allowing you to take some feature from any class that you want and use it. And Thieves' Cant, Cunning Action, and Hitting Beginnings, allowing you to stay hidden and find out answers to puzzles. The Valkyrie is what the Crusader wants to be if you go all in on the support role. Basically, the Valkyrie gets to fly about using their Valkyrist form, creating this aura that emanates in a cylinder about them. All friendly creatures within this cylinder get massive buffs, like refreshing temporary hit points every turn, or buffs to their attack rolls, whereas enemies get things like destructive damage over time and slowed down maneuverability. All this on top of the Cleric spell list and a special extra spell list that you have access to only when you're in your Valkyrist form. And the final class. This class is weird. The Polaritist is actually the most difficult class for me to talk about because it doesn't fit into any category. It is basically a half caster, half martial character, but it does it in such a strange manner. Basically, the Polaritist is all about their pendulum, where they're either in their dark side or light side, or they're in their nature side and their mechanic side. Basically, you pick two halves of a whole, dark and light, or evil and good, and your character will flip-flop between those modes as you use your abilities. So, for example, you can use something like Bleeding Strikes, but it causes you to drain into your light side. And then when you go into your light side, you can use things like Mixed Spell, but it causes you to boost back into that dark side. And so you'll be flopping between the two halves. The one half is very martial focused. Like, we're talking no spellcasting capabilities whatsoever. In fact, you don't even have spell slots. Whereas if you're on your left side, you don't have spell slots, but you get spellcasting capabilities, and you can cast from any spell list. It's just they're all free to you as long as you're on that side. And so the Polaritist is a very unique class that does absolutely nothing like any of the other classes. It's completely unique, and it's completely based off of that flip-floppy performance where you're teetering on either edge both times. Anyway, that is all 40 classes that I have made so far. Again, like I said, a lot of these I'm not quite done with. I still have to, iron out all the kinks in them that aren't quite working properly, but I'll be doing that while I make these videos. That being said, it's time that I bring up the 3 classes that you guys can vote on seeing next. So between Barbarian, Samurai, and Witch, which one of these do you want to see me cover next? You can vote down below in the comments, and I'll also be posting these on my Discord, which you can join in the description down below, as another thing you can vote on in the announcements tab. And so if you want to see one of those specific ones next, that's the Barbarian, the Samurai, or the Witch, just vote in the comments below, and that'll be the next one that I cover. Either way, thank you for watching this video, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye.